So, one thing that a lot of people get confused when it comes to spirituality is that the only purpose of spirituality is really to wake up. It's really to understand that you're not separate. That's the whole purpose of spirituality. There is no other purpose other than that. Um, People love to focus on the stories, the mythos, the mythology, the figures, the religious figures. People love to focus on the rituals, the seances. Um, and really, that's kind of what religion is. Religion, by definition, is literally just a system of beliefs and narratives and mythoses and ideas that are very well respected and even considered sacred or spiritually significant enough for large groups of people to express their admiration or their association in the form of ritual or seances. Basically, that's what religion is. Uh, but see, when people say, for example, I'm spiritual and not religious, a lot of people kind of scratch their head. Like, what does that mean? Well, that means I understand what reality is to the point where there is no real point in just, looking at a text and just reading a text, although a text like the Course in Miracles, for example, can help you in your spiritual journey. It can help you awaken to what you really are, but it's ultimately just a symbol. And once you have that holy instant where you instantaneously realize, I'm not separate, I'm not this body, I'm not even a separate soul, I'm not a separate spirit, I'm one with everything. There is no world, the world doesn't exist, none of this exists, etc. It's all just a figment, literally, of my imagination, of the collective mind's imagination that is dreaming of separation, including being you. And it may not appear like that in appearances because that's the whole point of this world. It's a subject versus object duality. And so the point of spirituality, rather than religion, is not to preserve some sort of culture pact. It's not to, create a different mythos and a different culture, or to give meaning to a culture or to give meaning to a particular group of people, because that's what historically, that's what religion was used for. No, it's more than that. It's literally just to wake up, realizing that you're not an individual and there's no need to do anything because the world is already perfect, because there is no world. But paradoxically, you kind of find yourself in this world because you believe in it. And so let's talk about the Course in Miracles. So the Course in Miracles, as I already explained in another video, if you don't know about the Course in Miracles, I highly recommend you stop what you're doing right now and you really just kind of get straight to reading the Course in Miracles. You don't have to learn everything that each and every lesson says. You can interpret it simply by just picking up the Course in Miracles and just reading it, whether it's the blue edition or the white edition. The white edition, I believe, I mean, I don't have the white edition, but I believe it's basically just the workbook, but without any borders or chapters or anything like that. It's literally just a flow of information as it was written by Helen Schucman back in the 20th century. And if you don't know about the history of the Course in Miracles, I highly recommend you check out the history by visiting these Foundation for Inner Peace. But what is the purpose of the Course in Miracles? I talk about the Course in Miracles a lot because the Course in Miracles is by far the greatest. It is the best universal curriculum. That is to say, it is a curriculum that's solely dedicated to cutting straight through the bullshit, cutting straight through the nonsense, and just getting straight to the point of what's actually important when it comes to spirituality and when it comes to all of these things. It's not going to tickle your ear with entertaining mythoses or anything like that. It's not going to tickle your ear with stories about what happened in the past and how the world came to be. This isn't like the Urantia book or anything like that, where it's going to tell you, oh, God created the heavens and the earth, God created matter. It tells you straight what is important enough for you to understand and learn, which is that you're not separate. You're not separate and everything is one. everything will forever be one. Okay, matter is an illusion, and the mind creates it. And so that's really the purpose of the Course in Miracles. That's the purpose of any spiritual curriculum. If you're reading something that doesn't tell you that the world is an illusion and that you need to wake up and realize that everything is one, and you need to take responsibility for what you see, and you do that through salvation by atonement, which is the forgiveness of the belief in sin and the forgiveness of the belief that you're separate, I would highly recommend you to just stop reading whatever it is that you're reading, because it's not serving your ultimate purpose. Now, the Course in Miracles tells you that consciousness is fundamental, or at least maybe awareness. I don't know about consciousness necessarily, because that seems to be the domain of the ego. But at the very least, consciousness as in the non-perceptual, non-dualistic type of existence, the pure mind, which is spirit. That is what's fundamental, because that is an extension of God. It says that you are a son of God, which doesn't mean that you are a body, but rather that what you actually are, not what you think you are, this ego autobiographical identity that you've convinced yourself is what you are, which is nothing more than a concept. It doesn't actually exist in time, because there is no time. Everything's just happening now. There's no future. There's no past, right? Your memories aren't even perfect records of the past at all. Everything is just an illusion. You see everything around you. Like, for example, you see this room that's around me, right? And you think, well, this is pretty solid, right? You know, you look at a metal bar, for example, and you touch a metal bar, but there's no metal inside of you, right? You touch it, it feels cold, it feels smooth, right? But these qualities are not inside of your skull. They're not inside of your brain. That's for sure. There's no metal inside of your brain, right? You're already creating an idea of metal, and you're already projecting using the mind's belief. You're already projecting qualia to describe that is useful in describing what it is that you're perceiving. But there is none of that in your brain, right? Inside your skull is nothing but a cold, dark, wet place. And there's nothing in there. There's no consciousness in the brain itself. People talk about, well, you know, we have synapses and we have neurons, we have all these chemicals. Surely consciousness, surely awareness comes from the brain, right? No, it doesn't. But how can we actually know that? Well, in the Course in Miracles, Jesus, or whoever it is you believe Helen Schucman was channeling, whether you think it was Jesus or basically just God, or just the memory of oneness, the Holy Spirit, that is using a familiar figure that Helen Schucman would undoubtedly be familiar with and would respect in order for the communication to run smoothly, like the figure of Jesus, right? Which is very historically important for Westerners, especially. You know, regardless, Jesus tells us in the Course in Miracles that, you know, when you actually apply reason, right, which is a mental construction, to your situation, you have no other option, no other choice but to accept the fact that only oneness exists, that only God exists, that you, the way you perceive yourself, do not exist, even though you still paradoxically find yourself in this experience of being a body and waking up in the morning and going to work and all of these other things, right? Which is all happening at an instant moment. There is no past, right? Memories are never recordings of the past. And so paradoxically, you still kind of find yourself in this place. You still find yourself in this world, despite the fact that it doesn't exist, right? Extremely paradoxical, but paradoxical nevertheless. And so kind of moving on with what I was saying, when you actually apply reason to your situation, you realize that there is no possible way that you could deny God's existence, which is your existence, because you and God are one. You are an emanation of God, an extension of God's being, right? You can kind of picture it like a golden bubble that is expanding. You're the expansion. The expansion is the kingdom of God, and you're a part of that. You're the extension of God. That's what the son means. You're the son of God. It's extension, what you really are, not this fake ego body that you think you are. That's not what you are. And that's never what you will be. Everything else is just an illusion. Everything else is just a projection. And so, for example, let's talk about this idea that consciousness comes from the brain. Well, consciousness does not come from the brain, right? People talk about, well, hold on. I mean, when people are thinking or when people are doing this, that, or the other, neuroscientists can use an MRI scan to kind of map where certain synapses might give off a certain signal, and that is very much correlated with the conscious experience that the subject is reporting on. So it seems like this neurological signal or this synapse is processing this type of information, and this is where consciousness comes from. But again, the devil is in the details, because when you use reason, you have to ask yourself, well, okay, hold on. You said the word process. I mean, I said the word process, right? But you get the point. Okay, process, what does that mean? So you're telling me that synapses, you're telling me that consciousness is an epiphenomenon from processes in the brain. But what does a process actually mean? How can something process anything, let alone a conscious experience? If something is processing a conscious experience in this very specific example of processes and its meaning, right, then by definition, it is conscious. Just like I'm processing a conscious experience. You can't process a conscious experience unless that processing also has consciousness. So at that point, you would probably have to be arguing that synapses are themselves conscious, because consciousness cannot process consciousness without it being conscious as well. You can't process consciousness or any conscious situation unless what it means to process also, of course, implies consciousness as well. So if you believe that synapses are processing anything that has to do with conscious experience in the brain, you are undoubtedly basically saying that, well, you have a consciousness that's processing a conscious experience in the brain. Because that it's the same thing. You cannot process a conscious experience without you yourself being conscious. So are synapses conscious? That's literally what you have to be arguing if you actually believe consciousness comes from the brain. Undoubtedly, you would have to be saying that synapses are conscious somehow. So we've only moved the goalpost. We didn't actually answer where consciousness comes from, right? Simply saying the brain isn't enough, because then we get to the specifics that is synapses, and then you have to accept that synapses are conscious. Okay, well, if those synapses are conscious, how did they become conscious? What is causing their conscious experience? Is there a tiny brain within even those synapses? You get what I'm saying? Is there a tiny brain even within those synapses? Right? Turtles all the way down. Turtles all the way down. Right? Infinite regress. Infinite regress. And you never get to the answer of what actually causes consciousness. But here's something that does actually provide you an answer. God is consciousness, and there's no how God can create consciousness, because God is everything. There is no opposite to God. When atheists say, well, show me the proof of God, I'm not convinced. There is no material proof of God, because what you call matter is just a symbol. It doesn't exist outside of ideas that the mind projects onto it, and you're not going to see proof of God in the form of matter in a material experience, which is nothing more than a dream state. As I said before, this entire world is nothing more than your projections of everything that's internal, that's inside of you, being projected outwards, which is also non-existent. Even in this world, there's a parallel. Everything you see around you is in you. It's in your skull, right? But of course, eventually you have to realize, well, it's not in your skull, because the skull is also a representation of something that does not actually exist as a thing in and of itself outside of that representation that my mind has constructed. So I'm not actually in my skull. It would be more appropriate to say that even the skull is just like an icon on a desktop computer screen. And of course, no desktop computer icon can be the source of all desktop computer icons. Basically, what I'm saying is the skull or the brain cannot be the origin of consciousness, of all the other conscious experiences, because it's akin to like a icon on a desktop computer screen. For more on that, you can look up Donald Hoffman, who has a great piece on consciousness as a neurosurgeon. But that's besides the point. Ultimately, my whole purpose in me even talking about this and in me ranting is ultimately just to tell you that once you actually apply reason, you have no choice but to admit that all is one. Because if all is consciousness or awareness, whatever you want to call it, you are part of that. You are not separate. Everything you see is just a projection of what you think reality is, which is bullshit. That's what this world is. It's nothing but bullshit. This is a place where things come to die. There's no purpose here. There's just a cycle of suffering. You're never going to find purpose or meaning in form. You're never going to find purpose or meaning in anything that's not spirit and anything that's not content, which is of the mind, of God, of the spirit. And that's what the Course in Miracles ultimately aims for. That's what it's trying to get people to learn and to understand. And so people have a difficult time reading the Course in Miracles, and then they kind of get frustrated with themselves. There's no reason to get frustrated, because your worth is not established by what you can learn. Your worth has already been established by God, who created you. You don't have to be frustrated over anything. The Course in Miracles is just a curriculum that aims to remind you what you are and what you have always been, so that you can disassociate yourself from this dream and never have to return here in the form of reincarnation or whatever you want to call it, which is really just a metaphor for the Son of God, the mind that still values form, that still values some sort of experience as an individual or as a body or something like that. And so that's really all I would have to say, honestly. That's the purpose of the Course in Miracles. You are, in a dream world where you think that situations, including the bad situations, so-called bad, just kind of appear out of nowhere, and you have to kind of deal with it because, well, you have no choice. But that's not true. Everything that you see isn't a problem and doesn't become a problem unless you actually project meaning to it. And so Jesus in the Course in Miracles actually uses a metaphor like, for example, the battlefield. A person that is battling in a battlefield against another oppressive force that is trying to completely and totally destroy you and your team or your army or what have you, is doing it because they, just like you, are invested in whatever conflict you think has meaning. Conflict can only exist if you believe in separation. Conflict can only exist if you believe that there are two or more opposing forces that are trying to battle for some sort of imagined supremacy over the other in the name of establishing themselves as superior and themselves as the truth that can stand alone and not be taken down or combated or outcompeted, etc. And so this world is kind of like that. You kind of find yourself in this battlefield where, you have a body that's your avatar, and there's like a point of reference. You're looking at the world around you. You're seeing your men die. You're seeing other soldiers die. And you think, wow, I'm in a real situation here. I have to fight, right? Because of this imagined protection of what I think I am. But Jesus tells us, what if you were to actually look at this entire battlefield that you think is going on from a bird's eye view, right? From a bird's eye view, from the top, right? If you were to look at this battlefield from the top down, you would see, oh, wait, hold on. None of this stuff actually affects me, right? These soldiers are nothing more than puny little ants that are fighting for something that ultimately doesn't matter. Right? No conflict actually matters. in the sky, in the clouds, that's completely disassociated from all the madness that's happening on the ground. But because you think that you're a body, you find yourself on the ground, you find yourself in this battlefield, and you're like, well, I gotta protect my honor, or I gotta do this, or I gotta do that. Says who? It's just your belief. You're invested in this because no man that's not invested in conflict would ever dream of participating in conflict because there's nothing for him to participate in. It's meaningless. It may as well not exist. It's nothing. Right? And that's what the Course in Miracles is trying to tell you, that your entire reality is like that. You think that you are a subject observing the objects that you think are external of you, when everything you see around you is just a projection of your own thought process, very much like a dream, right? It's literally just your subconscious mind coming into form. And the way you escape the dream is by actually going through the process of understanding that you're not separate and going through the lessons in the Course in Miracles, right? It takes significant mind training to eventually snap out of the dream. And that's the ultimate purpose. You need to find yourself back in eternity where all is one, formless, and the same. You need to get out of that imagined battlefield that you think you're in, where you are justified in condemning another man because you believe, for example, that, well, everybody has their own truths, and not only does everybody have their own truths, but hey, only one thing can be the truth, and that's going to be my truth. And I need to battle my brother, and I need to condemn him because, well, we can all sin, right? We can all commit an offense because we're all separate individuals. And if one man can commit an offense, then of course that man is deserving of punishment and condemnation. That is the god of the ego. The god of the ego is condemnation. And so long as you condemn another man rather than forgive, right? Which we'll talk about in another video, what forgiveness means in the Course of Miracles. But if you withhold forgiveness, you are still maintaining the belief that salvation is impossible. And if you believe salvation is impossible, then there's no point in you reading the Course in Miracles, because that's the whole point of the Course in Miracles, to tell you that atonement of sin and error in thinking is possible. That the atonement is possible and even necessary, even inevitable. But so long as you find yourself contradicting that by making compromises, you turn that salvation or that belief in salvation, that, hey, I can actually free myself from these delusions and establish inner peace inside of me, you turn it into another form of attack. I'm better than the other person, and the other person needs to be condemned. For if salvation could attack, it wouldn't actually be salvation, it would be condemnation. And thus the meaning of salvation would be meaningless if it could attack. But because it cannot attack, we can only assume then, therefore, that your belief in condemnation is but your own belief. And so do not condemn your brother, because your brother is just another version of you in a different bodysuit. We're all one, as the mystics like to say. Appearances are not real. Appearances and form themselves have no content outside of what the mind projects. I already talked about that using the metal bar example, right? There's no metal in your brain. There are no isotopes in your brain. Your brain is not smooth, right? And even when you touch your own brain and you experience smoothness, where does that smoothness exist? In my brain. Really? You can see your brain, can you? Yeah, well, where does that experience exist? It doesn't exist in the brain. When I touch my brain, I'm touching something that I am projecting as the brain, but where does that image of the brain exist in? It can't exist in the brain because I'm looking at the brain, or I know what the brain is. It's a symbol. It's a symbol, right? The origins of symbols cannot itself be a symbol, and consciousness is not a symbol. That's why it's invisible and we can't directly see it. We can only infer it based on the body's actions, which are being animated by the mind. So only mind can be one, bodies can be many, form can be many, form can attack, But form can never have content in it of themselves, and mind can never attack because mind is like a ghost. It's everything and everywhere. It can never attack. Only the belief in bodies can attack. And therefore, your brother is not actually your brother because he's not separate from you. He's you, but in a different body. And he's not going to attack you because there is no him, just like there is no you. It's all just a conscious projection, screenplay, with the body being completely and totally illusory because it's just an overlay of a bunch of images and concepts that exist within consciousness. So, like I said, there will be a point where you have to accept this. It's inevitable that you do, and it's inevitable that you will accept it. Right now, you may think, oh, this is just a bunch of hippie bullshit. This is whatever. But of course, that's what everybody says until they actually realize that, well, this world is not offering me anything. My belief in this world is not offering me anything. There must be another way. That's what Helen Schucman said before she started writing the Course in Miracles. After getting a message, of course, from a voice in her head that she identified as Jesus. And so that's all I have to say, honestly. There's really nothing more than that. That's, the purpose of the Course in Miracles, the purpose of spirituality is always to awaken. If you're not awakening, there is no point. There is no point to any of it. It might as well be dead. That's all I got to say. Thank you. I love you, and God bless.